welcome to Shazzy Reads. You can call me Shaz. Today we are going to do a wrap up for the month of May, and also I'm going to talk about two books that I read in June just because I've got them, so I might as well talk about them. So May was a bit of a weird month for me. I usually get my books from the library bus that comes into town on Saturdays. And at one point in May there was an issue with the bus, so it didn't come that week, so I had like 2 weeks where I was kind of like, what do I read? So I ended up rereading a couple of books that I had been meaning to reread that I had on my shelves. So let's jump into what I did read in May, and I'll be going in the order that I read them. So the first book that I read in May was A Pocket Full of Rye by Agatha Christie. This is a Miss Marple book. In this one, an older businessman dies in his office and he is found with a pocket full of rye, hence the title. I thought this one was just okay for an Agatha Christie book. As you would expect from Miss Christie, there is a lot of suspects and no clear true suspect in this one. And I must admit that in this one I didn't guess the culprit or the motive, which is pretty rare for me in Agatha Christie at this point. I've read most of her books, so I do know how she works, so I have to give it props for that. But even though I had a fun time with this one, I don't think that the characters were as charming and as likeable and as memorable as in a lot of her other works. So I can't say that it was one of my favourites of hers, and I ended up rating it a 3.5 stars. The next book was a reread, and that was And Then There Were None, also by Agatha Christie. I read this a few years ago, and then I ended up with my own copy, and because I couldn't really remember a whole lot of what happened in it, I did want to give it a reread. As you may know, I feel like this is a pretty famous book, but basically a bunch of people end up trapped on an island. They each get killed off one by one. I did think it was interesting to reread this because I did kind of remember who the culprit was. So it was interesting to see how Agatha Christie had tried to conceal who the culprit was. So I definitely don't regret rereading it. Unlike a lot of people, this actually isn't one of my favourite Agatha Christie's, and I think by rereading it I was able to figure out why that is. With a lot of Agatha Christie books, there is a lot of theatrics and comedy, and that's kind of missing from And Then There Were None. It feels a lot drier and more straightforward than a lot of her books. So even though I can totally understand why a lot of people love this one, it's just not one of my favourite from hers, but I'd still rate it a 4 out of 5 stars. And then I read yet another Agatha Christie, which was The Mysterious Affair at Styles. So this one, I actually thought this was a reread because for some reason, like, I've got like a Word document with all of her books in it, which I cross out whenever I finish one, and for some reason I had crossed this out, so I thought this was a reread while I was reading it, and then I checked Storygraph and Goodreads after reading it, and I hadn't marked it on there, so like I kind of gaslit myself while reading this, like, oh yeah, that sounds a bit familiar. So yeah, but anyhow, this is the first book Agatha Christie ever published. It is a prologue book, and it is told from the POV of his friend Hastings. He is invited to this old country estate by his old friend, and their tensions are running high. The stepmother has just remarried, and people don't approve of this remarriage because it seems pretty clear that the guy is only out for her money. And then the woman ends up dead, seemingly being poisoned. I thought this was an interesting read just to see where a lot of Agatha Christie's common recurring tropes that you see in a lot of her books originated, and this one does feature a lot of those tropes that as someone who's read a lot of her books, I've come to know and love. So it's definitely interesting to see that. But otherwise it's not one of her best. I don't think that the characters are very memorable or the case is very memorable. But it was still a fun read. I'm glad I read it. And I'd still rate it like a 3.25 stars. The next book was a reread, and that was The Language of Thorns by Leigh Bardugo. This one is set in her Grishaverse. It is a collection of short stories. Each short story kind of belongs to a different culture in the Grishaverse. And a lot of it is like retellings of fairy tales, which I've always been a sucker for, and this one definitely delivers on that. There are a lot of interesting takes on older fairy tales, which I really enjoyed. Also, the art is gorgeous. basically in each chapter there will be like borders as you go through them, and like each page will add more detail to the borders. It's gorgeous. It's really good to keep. It's really nice to keep track of as you're reading them. I've really enjoyed rereading this. I definitely didn't enjoy it as much as I did when I first read it, but like I still think that a lot of it's really interesting, and I'd recommend it if you are a fan of like fairy tales. You don't even need to be familiar with the Grishaverse to read this, because a lot of it kind of feels like it doesn't need to be connected to the Grishaverse. I think my favourite tale was the last one, When Water Sank By, which was The Little Mermaid retelling, and it's really good. It's kind of sapphic, and yeah, always love that. So this one I'm definitely going to keep on my shelves, but I lowered my rating down from a 5 stars to a 4 stars, because even though I enjoyed it, I definitely didn't enjoy it as much as when I first read it. Next book was another reread, and that was Circe by Madeline Miller. I'm not too clear on how to pronounce Circe. I've heard different ways of saying it, but I did look at an interview with Madeline Miller and she did say Circe, so that's what we're going with. So this is a retelling of the Greek myth of Circe, who was known for living on an island, and when a ship came through, she would turn the men into pigs. This retelling examines her motives for doing so, as well as like the other Greek myths that her story intersects with. So I absolutely loved this when I first read it. I think I read it soon after it came out and I loved it. I think rereading it, I was able to see some of the flaws in it, particularly I noticed that Circe's life really revolves around the men in it. Like, she does interact with women, but like I don't think this would pass the Bechdel test. You know, not that the Bechdel test is the be all end all for feminism or anything, but like I did notice like a lack of female friendships in this, and even when Circe does end up developing a female friendship, most of the time they talk about their sons. So I noticed that and I could not notice it, and I feel like there was a bit of a missed opportunity for more of female friendships in this. That being said, you could also argue that Circe's lack of ability to form connections with other women is part of her tragedy. So I suspect that might have been what Madeline Miller was going for, and if so, I do think that adds to it. Still, I really enjoyed it. The writing style drew me in, and I just wanted to keep on reading it. And even though like the chapters are really long, but like you finish one and you're like, oh, I kind of want to read on. So I'd still rate it like a 4.25 stars, and I'm definitely going to be keeping it. But I do think I didn't like it quite as much as I did when I initially read it. The next book I'm going to talk about is a junior fiction called The Hotel Witch by Jessica Miller. So this book follows a young girl. She is an apprentice to the Hotel Witch. So in this world, there's magic everywhere, and in this hotel, the Hotel Witch uses magic to kind of like shine shoes and fix guests' like issues and stuff. So this book follows Sibyl, who is the apprentice to the Hotel Witch, who is her grandmother, and she really wants to learn like more advanced magic. She doesn't see the point in all these small spells, like, you know, like again, polishing shoes, polishing floors, all that kind of thing. And Sibyl really struggles with concentrating, which is why her grandmother doesn't want to teach her these advanced spells. But when her grandmother goes missing, it is up to Sibyl to step up as the Hotel Witch and solve the guest problems, while meanwhile shadows are starting to disappear in the hotel and something really fishy is going on. So I did really enjoy the magic system here. So Sibyl has these buttons on her, what is it called, a pinafore? I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. And each button has a different pattern on it to denote the different spells, so she can feel it, she can feel the pattern, and then she would draw the pattern with her wand and flick it over to the object that she wants the spell to affect. I thought this was a really interesting magic system. I did kind of want more limits placed on it because I didn't feel like there were a whole lot of limits. I also felt that like the story was a bit off with the pacing. the story is meant to take place over like, I think like 4 weeks. But we spend so much time in those first few days before her grandmother disappears, and then her grandmother does disappear, and then we kind of rush through her like stepping up and gaining more confidence in herself. And I would have loved more time like spent on that. I also found like some of the plot elements to be predictable, but it is a junior fiction. I feel like that's kind of permissible in this kind of thing. Still, if I was a kid, I think I would have loved this. There's so much imaginativity in it. Sibyl's a relatable character, you know, and like I would definitely recommend this. Like, if you know a kid who's really into magic and stuff like that, I think they would absolutely love this. So I ended up rating this at 3.5 stars just because, like, I could easily see that if I was younger, I would have absolutely loved this. The final book that I read in May was A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking by T. Kingfisher. So this book follows Mona, who is a baking wizard. Her magic is to do with bread, so she can convince bread to not burn in the oven or to rise or to be fluffy and stuff like that. So in this world, like, there are wizards, but they're very specific with their powers and what they can do. Like, some wizards are more powerful than others, but people like Mona, their magic only affects a single thing, which is bread. So the story starts when Mona is in the bakery one morning getting ready for the day, and she discovers a dead body in the oven. So this kicks off a chain of events which leads to her being targeted by an assassin, presumably the same one who murdered the girl. So in the run, in a city that is becoming increasingly hostile to wizards, Mona must become a hero to save her Tara. This was just really whimsical and sweet. I thought Mona was a great main character. I enjoyed the themes of heroism and what it really means to be a hero at the age of 14. I thought the world building was very cool and very interesting and innovative. And there was a lot of funny one-liners, which I really enjoyed. The climax reminded me of the climactic scene in Shrek 2, which I always enjoy being reminded of, because what a fantastic scene. So I thought that this was a really fun and interesting read, and I ended up rating it 3.5 stars. It didn't do anything like more to that to become like a favourite of mine or anything, but I did think that it was a fun ride. So next up, because we're in June at the moment and I've already finished 2 books and I've got them with me, and I'm going to have to return them to the library, I might as well talk about them now. So the first of those is Killers of a Certain Age by Deanna Raybourn. So this book is basically like 2000's Charlie's Angels, but the women are 60 years old and have retired. They were professional assassins, but now they're retired. They're on a retirement cruise, and they discover that the organization that they have been working for has decided to target them, so they go on the run. I thought this was a very fun read, a lot of good comedy, and it was really nice to see protagonists who were in their 60s. I thought that the 4 leads didn't have very distinct personalities. Like, any time that they had a line and it didn't clearly say who was speaking the line, I did not know who was saying it, because they all kind of came across as very similar. It also isn't a very diverse book. It's hard to say because I don't think the 4 main characters are ever clearly described in the book, but I'm pretty sure that all 4 of them are white. One of them is married to a Japanese woman, but she doesn't really have much of a point. Like, she does come into the book, but I don't feel like the woman does become present in the story, but she doesn't have much of a distinct personality, and like, she could have been like any race, you know. There is a Ukrainian girl as well, but that's about it for diversity in this book. Parts of the book are in flashbacks and they don't really have much of a point to them. I feel like a lot of the information that we get in them we get through the main narrative anyway, and they could have just been taken out and it wouldn't make much of a difference. There was one part in this book which made me cackle out with laughter. So like I said, there's this young Ukrainian woman. She does all this like tech stuff, like she gets them burner phones, she gets them she gets them identification and stuff like that. And at one point they're going to go on like a train, so they can't like they don't want to like be so they don't want to be texting each other their plans in case the customs officers see them. And so this girl makes them an app called Menopause. Like menopause is MPAWS. So this app has like this cat. This menopause tracker app has this cat, and they can like customize the cat design. And then like one of the women talks to the other like, no one would believe that you had menopause yet. And so the girl's like, I've got the period poodle. I've got the period poodle app. And it's just like this poodle with a beret. It's this French poodle. Oh, like even thinking about it, I'm laughing because it was so funny. And I would get the period poodle app. Sorry. Anyhow, so like stuff like that was like really funny, and like it was why I enjoyed this book to the extent that I did. This was just a really fun read. Again, I don't think that the characters were very well done, and that like I don't know, and I thought that the plot was a bit predictable at points, but I still really enjoyed it, and I would recommend it if the premise sounds like something you would like. And finally, I'm going to talk about A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. In this book, we follow Sam, who is I forget the term of it. I think it's an archaeoentomologist. So she's like an archaeologist, but with insects. So she is meant to be going on this dig, but the dig gets cancelled like a few days in because they find Native American remains. So she needs to like go somewhere while that's being sorted out. So she ends up returning to her childhood home to stay with her mother. This home is like this old home in North Carolina, and it belonged to her grandmother, who was not a very nice lady. So she returns home, but things are a bit weird. Her mother has lost a lot of weight. She has repainted the house from the colourful walls to different shades of white, and she's changed like the photos around to photos that her grandmother liked, and she won't hear like a bad word about her grandmother. So I've just thought this was really interesting. It was so creepy and atmospheric and hard to put down. Sam was a really good main character. I do think that the plot progressed a bit slowly. Like it took a while for Sam to come to like the natural conclusion that this place is haunted. Even though like a lot of creepy stuff happens, and it just takes her a good while to come to the conclusion that supernatural stuff might be happening. But like it makes a sense because Sam has a history of science, and it makes sense that her first thought would be, oh, I'm going crazy, my mother's going crazy, instead of like, oh, there's a ghost in this house. So even though I felt it was a bit slow in that part, it made sense why Sam wouldn't come to the first conclusion that this place is haunted. So this is a horror, and a lot of creepy stuff does happen, but unless you have like a very specific fear, this isn't going to keep you up at night, which I appreciated, but I know that some people like that horror with more horror in it, but because I'm a weakling, I didn't mind. But yeah, I just thought this was really interesting. I was really absorbed while I was reading it, and it's been a while since I've read a book like that, so I ended up rating this 4 out of 5 stars. I think this is my favourite T. Kingfisher that I've read so far, and I would highly recommend it if you're looking for like a creepy, atmospheric horror that's not going to keep you up at night. So that about does it for May and the start of June. I will admit, like I did notice, I don't think I read any books by authors of colour this month, which I will definitely try to rectify next month. I usually do tend to read more, but for whatever reason, obviously I need to diversify my reading a bit more. If you have any recommendations for books by authors of colour, pop them in the comments below. Remember to leave a like if you liked this video. I know that I often don't remember, so just a friendly reminder. And I will see you next month with my wrap up for June. I think I'm going to try at the moment, while I get used to everything, to just try to film one video a week. So I think the next one I'm going to do, it will be the booktube newbie tag. So I will see you then.